Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the 19th episode of When the Heart Leads. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Newberg, and I am just in awe to be with you all today. The title of this episode is Accepting Defeat, and when I first created that title, I thought, whoever is going to tune into this one? But it just feels like it's been a very, very potent time, and I want to share what I feel like are some really powerful energies that are just kind of moving and taking root and shifting in this time. So, um, I would like to kind of qualify some of the context. So if you're coming in now, maybe you're tuning in across time and space, coming to this later on. But I want to qualify some of the context of this moment right now. So I'm recording this just a few days before that full solar eclipse. And um, that and so I kind of have a whole feeling around a transmission around what that eclipse could mean for us right now. And in the framing of this, it feels really important to mention that in this idea of accepting defeat, right, the thing that we're talking about, it doesn't actually mean letting go of that which is deeply, deeply true. But what might be important for us to understand in this potent time is that what is deeply true for us is going to emerge into our hearts, into clarity, into our lives in a way that might be very unexpected. And so, in some ways, I want to talk about this moment where we are almost ready to kind of, you could say, give up, or this is a different way of looking at surrender. So, this is a very potent time right now of healing and release. And a lot of people I know, and myself included, right, have been kind of in this transition time, in this portal time. And it feels like a lot of stuff, like some of that most subtle stuff, those subtle layers that are not in service to our heart, to our soul, to our deepest purpose in this lifetime, those subtle layers are really coming up right now to be cleansed. And it feels important to mention that this doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It simply means that it's time, right? There's something about the divine timing of right now. So it can feel like there are many, many deep wounds emerging right now, right? And maybe you're tuning into this and this just doesn't feel right. And that's fine. I'm really speaking to those of us who I know who are just kind of feeling like in this time, there's a lot of really, really intense stuff happening, right? And when these wounds arise, they can feel very, very real. Like they can almost feel like this very compelling invitation to go back into them. And I am discovering, and I'm talking, if you're just tuning in for the first time, I speak a lot from personal experience. So a lot of what I speak of in these podcasts, it's stuff that I'm working with very strongly in the moment as well. So this is very alive for me as well, if you're wondering. But I'm discovering that there's a much gentler way to work with these wounds, to see what they have to teach us as they arise in this very intense kind of portal moment, you could say, right before the eclipse. And so these are not energies that can be fought, right? So there's a I have a bunch of notes here, and I'm wondering as we go through, I'm gonna wonder like a lot even has shifted since I've written these notes, so I'm gonna be referring to them, but there's also like space right now for a more organic transmission to come through, and but kind of orienting around what's emerging, which can feel very intense, and how to work with these energies in a way that allows us to really deeply, truly heal. Right. So I think that's overall the overpowering invitation of right now is to really deeply, truly heal from some of these subtlest, most subtle layers of wounding that are emerging right now. And I actually had a very funny teacher for this lesson, and it's a new cat that I adopted, and I named her Aura, of all things. So that's kind of funny, but I named her Aura, and she is actually in the other room, so um, she may come over and say hi. But something very unexpected occurred when I brought her home, which was that an immense upwelling of grief occurred for me. Very immense, very strong. And I realized that it was kind of an invitation for me to look at what happened was about 4 years ago, my other cat ran away, and he was kind of my soul cat. Like, I loved him. And for a long time after he ran away, I didn't feel anything. And then about 6, 8 months later, suddenly, like it all came to the surface. And what happened when I got this new cat was all very unexpectedly, all these very subtle old stories came to the surface. And these stories were around guilt, they were around grief, they were around being able to care for another being, right? And I was not expecting to have all that because it had been, like I said, it had been 4 years. And so this new cat comes into my life, and I suddenly saw, the ways, the very subtle, deep layers that were no longer working for me, but they were so subtle and they were so embedded in my way of being that I didn't see them until this cat showed up. And what it was actually a strange configuration of what you could call perfectionism. So, in some ways, I felt like if I didn't do everything exactly right, or if I betrayed trust, or there's some sort of barometer that I need to be measured against at all times. And if I don't measure up to that, something really, really bad will happen. Right? And this was a very unexpected energy to occur, but what ended up happening was I was able to really start to see in my life, and maybe I just want to mention this feels like a much more personal share, perhaps this time. A lot of times I'm looking a lot at some of usually the flow of these podcasts are I'll look at something kind of transcendent, then I'll come back into a personal experience, and then I'll kind of come back to the transcendence. With this one, the way it seems to be presenting is to go straight into the personal share. And maybe part of that is just to frame it in this very, very deep personal way. So that's kind of why I'm bringing all this up now. But so coming back to perfectionism, I was able to see this very subtle drive. And it was subtle because it was so familiar with the way that I've been in my life. And a lot of times what ends up happening when something like a tragedy occurs is it just kind of reinforced this idea that I must have been doing something wrong, and that's why this tragedy occurred. And if I could just do everything right, then that's really the only way to stay safe, right? Just doing everything right. But then what does it mean to do everything right? There's some sort of vague and undefined external barometer for what I was trying to measure myself against. And this also has come up really strongly because I've started work on my third book. So I started writing my third book, and the first two books I wrote were very much, it was kind of an intense experience of making sure I ordered my time in a really clear way so that I always had time to write. Right? And it was a really intense experience of defining in a very rigid way what my boundaries were so I would have time to write. And this new book is really inviting me into a very different way of being. A way of being that's more relaxed, a way of being that's more open, a way of being that allows transmissions to come in at different times. Like it doesn't have to be the same time every morning. Like I was very rigid and scheduled in my first two books, and this can be difficult to trust. So just to kind of take a step back, right? We have what many of us may be encountering finally in this very potent portal are the visible emanations of these very deep, subtle, almost fully accepted energies that are truly no longer in service to what our soul is here to create, to become. And I think that contributes to a lot of the intensity of this time, because when we have what might feel like that last barrier that's keeping us safe, and that last barrier is starting to arise now to be seen and released, it can be very intense and it can create a lot of fear. All right, and I definitely, as I'm moving into what feels like the portal of my third book, right, which is kind of emerging as this new way of creating, right, creating in co-creation with the larger forces that are here, loving forces that are here to guide us into more natural ways of being, right? As this book comes forward, it's really asking me to live the messages that are coming through. And these messages, within these messages, there is absolutely no place for something like perfectionism, right? And it's coming to me, right? How very deeply I have structured my life around this idea of perfectionism. And I'm offering like perfectionism, right, as an example, because it's the one that's most alive for me. But perhaps for you, there might be other types of energies that you've maybe unconsciously ordered your life around. And this ordering has been in a way of making sure that you're safe, right? There's some sort of safety associated with it. And that safety is oftentimes associated with avoiding the maybe cruelty or energies coming in from others, right? And so that has served in some ways as a defense mechanism. But in this way that we're being asked to move now, those deepest kind of safeguards are now being asked to be seen and released. And so the reason that I titled this episode Accepting Defeat is that we're finally coming to a place where those energies we have to really accept that those energies, whatever they are for you, for me, it's a really kind of clinging to some idea of perfectionism, right? And for you, maybe it's, maybe it's staying small, right? Maybe for you, it's something like, staying small, apologizing, not wanting to take up too much space, not wanting to allow for your needs to be really real and accepted, right? I know some people who I see as unbelievably powerful lead with apologies. And I can see that they lead with apologies or with apologizing because it's a way to keep people off their back, right? And people have all sorts of ways of having that, right? Like I see some people who talk nonstop, and that talking is a defense mechanism against actually receiving what other people have to say, because that receiving, oftentimes what other people have had to say have been cruel, right? So if you just keep talking, no one can talk back. No one talks back, you can't hear cruelty, right? So so someone like that, the invitation is into a deep space of listening, which can be very scary, right? Because those spaces of listening have often, what's often happened is that they received cruelty, right? Or, for people who are accustomed to encountering like judgment or meanness, right? Leading with an apology is kind of a way of or leading, even like I'm talking here like very energetically, right? So you might even be leading not with a verbal apology, but with like a demeanor of apology, like, oh, I'm really sorry that I've whatever the energy of the apology is. It can be shown in your body through constriction, right, or contraction, or essentially making yourself non-threatening, right? And what that does is maybe it keeps some people off your back, but what it ultimately does is it stops you from expanding and expressing fully, right? In an unapologetic way. We're talking about moving into a place of deep and powerful self-acceptance, right? And in that place of deep and powerful self-acceptance, those those energies of defense, those mechanisms of defense are going to begin to fall away at the deepest layers, at the subtlest layers, right? And so that can feel like defeat. So when I'm talking about the eclipse, right? Kind of the energy I've been getting for that is that moment of darkness where the light goes out. And it can feel that way when we're really letting go of things that seem to have kept us safe. And I want to mention that there's no circumventing that, right? As we're looking at transformation, as we're looking at rebirth, right? There's really no circumventing that moment of void, of pure unknowing, because our souls are designed to birth new, unprecedented things, which means that when we're really ready and it feels like energetically, right, we're stepping into a complete and unprecedented rebirth, we have to allow the space for fear, confusion, and unknowing to come up, right? And that is what feels like what's happening as we truly let go of these really, at the deepest and subtlest layers, let go of the defense mechanisms that we've had up until now, because those are acting as constrictions on our soul for what our soul really wants to bring through. So I had a vision at one point of the moment of rebirth. And it feels really poignant right now. And I'm going to bring it up. And again, I'm kind of going off my notes. I'm like glancing, going back, but this felt like such an image. I saw a person staring kind of out at the landscape, and it was a darkened landscape. There's no light at all. And it was a desert landscape, and there was, for miles, if you've ever been to maybe Moab or Utah, right, it kind of felt like that, like miles and miles and miles of just desert. And if you've ever experienced a desert night, right, without any stars, it can feel, it's this very isolating, dark, cold feeling, right? And so I got this vision of a person kind of standing, and they'd been watching for the dawn for a very, very long time. And it just did not come. It did not come, and it did not come, and it did not come. And finally, the last reserves of their hope kind of dissipated. And in that moment where the last reserves of hope dissipated, I could see this person in my vision. They fell to their knees and they had given up. And that's that moment of accepting defeat, right? And I think perhaps we've all been there, to that place of breaking, right? And we are asked to go back there again and again and again. And this time feels almost like a collective time of that moment, right? And there's no circumventing that moment. That time of your breaking, that time where you have just lost all hope. And I understand as I'm talking, like, I understand this. We've had a series of kind of heavy episodes, but it's also felt like a series of kind of heavy portal that we're in, right? So I want to speak to these energies a little bit. And so there's that moment, and that's the eclipse moment, I feel, where it just all goes dark, where the light has gotten less and less and less, and finally it's gone. And in that moment, that's when you're accepting defeat, right? That's that moment, another way of thinking about surrender. And then in my vision, the person turned around and saw that the sun was rising and they'd been facing the wrong direction. And it was just that shift of perspective, that shift of position that allowed them to start seeing the hope of the new dawn. And what happens after having experienced something as devastating as that defeat, right? Where maybe everything you thought you could rely on or trust crumbles beneath you or is gone, or that dawn you've been waiting for, that you're working for so long, just isn't coming and you finally just give up on it, right? What oftentimes will happen is that we don't trust when the dawn is here. And that was something that I have been and really confronting in myself is, I feel like we've been conditioned, I've certainly been maybe conditioned to trust in hardship, to trust in the challenges, right? So when something bad happens, we don't really question it a lot of times. We're like, oh yeah, of course something bad happened. This is just what happens. Bad things happen, right? I trust that. I trust that, this is crumbling, that's falling away, right? And the invitation of that moment where you fall to your knees, where you really accept that the ways that you've been moving in the world, the defense mechanisms you've had just no longer are working, and you don't know what's next, right? That's a very, very potent time to recode your experience, right? And so as we're kind of in this eclipse portal that feels like so much is coming up and just asking us to kind of just surrender to it, right? Because the more we fight it, these difficult things, the more they kind of persist, the more energy they take. Finally, at some point, we just do let it go, right? And in that moment of letting go, that's what I'm talking about. That moment where you've accepted defeat, that is a powerful time to recode your experience. So you can't circumvent that. That's maybe the eye of the needle we talk about, the passing through that really difficult time of initiation. But then on the other side, once you've really felt that fully, on the other side is the dawn, right? And what often happens is we don't trust when the dawn is here because we have been so conditioned to accept hardship. And so when I'm talking in this episode about accepting defeat, really in some ways what I'm talking about is allowing the parts of us that do not work, that do not serve the dawn, this dawn of our soul, this dawn of a new way of being, to let those go and allow ourselves to be recoded, right, from that place of deep vulnerability. And the recoding that's happening here is a recoding into trusting grace, trusting good fortune, trusting the dawn that's coming in, right? In the same way that in the past we've trusted challenge and hardship. So when we can start to trust, and it's a process, right? It's a process. And in some ways what I'm talking about is coming back into Eden, right? And a lot of when I'm talking about my third book, I'm going to be really exploring that idea of what Eden is and how we can begin to bring it forward now, right? But we're being recoded, we're being invited to trust that which is good and pure and loving, right? Because from these places of relaxation, right, I was talking about how this book is inviting me into relaxation. I almost don't trust it, right? Like I almost don't trust it if I don't have the rigid structures that were in place for my first two books. This one's not going to come through. It's just not going to work, right? And at the same time, there's a part of me that is very drawn to the invitation to relax, the invitation to allow, the invitation to surrender. And that is in some ways the internal battle that's been happening, is accepting defeat in this context means accepting the defeat of everything that has been trying to keep you from your fullest soul expression. And if you tune into kind of your life right now, you might start to see those energies arise. Like we talked a little bit about what those could like. For me, it's that perfectionism, that kind of like very structured, ordered, almost that rigidity, not even almost, but the rigidity around how I must structure my time in order for creation to happen, right? And it's this driving force that doesn't actually allow for the full expression to occur, but it's difficult to trust because that new way, because it's so different from how I've operated, right? So that accepting defeat in some ways is the allowing that the ways of doing things that are not in harmony or alignment with your soul will no longer work. And in that accepting of defeat, there's a lot of fear that can come forward. There's a lot of fear that can come forward. And so I'm speaking to that moment of the darkness where we're really being recoded into a new way of being and creating, but we don't yet know exactly what that is. We haven't fully realized it in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts, and in our life, right? So it's an invitation into trusting a new way arising once we have allowed ourselves to truly let go of those old patterns. So when we're in this moment of the eclipse, in this moment of the darkness, right, we're entering into this very generative portal, right? The invitation is to start to allow the softness of that, the genesis of a new way in that deep womb space that we're going into. And so we can allow everything that's arising and at the same time see within the turmoil or the destruction in some ways of what hasn't worked. We can see what remains stable, secure, and true within us. And that is the dream of our soul. And so when we accept defeat, right, what's going to arise again and again and again is the dream of our soul from that place. That's eternal, right? And so we can begin to trust in that because we've seen it over and over again when all the rest of it's been cleared away. Right? So we can begin to step into the magic of that, begin to trust the magic of that. And begin to rewire ourselves so that when good things happen, when miracles happen, when good fortune happens, when luck happens, when joy, when contentment happens, we don't necessarily assume that it's some passing thing, but that's actually the way of being that we're being called into. I'm talking about harmony, contentment, joy, fulfillment, all of these things that are possible that oftentimes have felt like some sort of fantasy, or maybe that thing that you get to have when everything else is done, right? That's becoming our way of being. So in some ways, what I wrote here is that as we move into this generative space of reconfiguration, right, it's a very potent time to begin to define what our intentions are. And when the fear arises, it's a compelling invitation to go back into those old ways of being. But when we stay with it and stay open, new questions can begin to emerge. So new questions like not what's reasonable or what's practical, but what do you really truly desire? What do you truly want? Right? And oftentimes we curtail that question around what's practical or what's reasonable or what our past has shown us or what our patterns would define as reasonable or practical. But that's not what this moment in time is asking. This moment in time is asking what you truly want, what you truly desire, what your soul is speaking into existence. That is the power that is arising when we accept that all the other ways of being do not fulfill us and don't work, and we allow ourselves to be led into the defeat of what isn't working. And in that space, that's when the voice of our soul arises, telling us what we truly want. And the voice of our soul, the voice of our heart, it is not interested in what's practical. It is not interested in what is reasonable or it has nothing to do with that, because the voice of our soul is what commands miracles. And our fear has conditioned us not to trust those miracles, not to trust in the luck and the good fortune that arises when we begin to listen to the voice of our heart and our soul. But I'm telling you, we will be fulfilled by nothing less than that. And this is a potent time to accept the defeat of everything that just truly is not working and is not in alignment with our soul and our purpose. To allow ourselves to go through that portal of darkness, to be recoded and reconfigured in the light of our heart, in the light of our divine knowing. So, quick recap on this one, right? This 19th episode of When the Heart Leads. This one, maybe for me, it's felt a little less, maybe a little less clean, but then that's great because one of the energies I'm giving up on is perfectionism. So I'm just going to trust what came forward today. This is, again, the defeat we're talking about is the defeat of all the ways of being, the subtlest layers of self that just no longer work, no longer lead us. We're starting to understand that they will never lead us into what is truly fulfilling. All right, so that's the defeat that creates the moment of darkness, of unknowing, that we trust, reconfigure, get recoded into the light of our soul as we move forward. All right, so it may be that there's some catalyzing, no pun intended, considering mine had to do with cats, but catalyzing energies at play that are bringing these subtlest things to the surface to allow you to really see them. And maybe up until now, you haven't been fully cognizant of what those energies were. So for me, I was aware that perfectionism, right, isn't a good thing for me, but I didn't see how many layers that had been woven into my life and how I operate until now. All right, so so for me, it's that one. For you, it might be what we were talking about, constriction, apology, whatever. All that's coming up to be released now. So, allow yourself to begin to trust in what's good, in what's right, in what's happening for you that reinforces your divine nature and your powerful purpose. All right. Just kind of scanning to see if anything else wants to come up. Yeah, that's good. That's good. This is a huge invitation for us to begin to lighten up, right? After this really, really hard time, there's good fortune, there's lightness, there's contentment, there's joy, and it is coming. It is coming. and a whole new way of being and creating is becoming available to us. So let's hold to that when things get difficult or unclear. We can know that the clarity of our soul is always available to us when we tune in. All right, so this has been the 19th episode of When the Heart Leads. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Newberg, founder of Books of Eden Publishing, fellow traveler with you on this journey of being human at a time that is very rich and potent and generative for new ways of being. So if you want to learn more about my work, you can visit my website, booksofeden.com, see what I'm up to, and other things that I do and offer. So again, it's been this is bearing the lead, but real quick, I am doing a talk on the Radiant Feminine Rising live in person next Sunday, April 14th at the Creative Expo in Castle Rock. So if you would like to see me in person, I will be there, Castle Rock Expo, Douglas County Fairgrounds, 1 o'clock Sunday, the 14th. So if you listen to all this time, and I buried that lead, but that'll be on the Radiant Feminine Rising. So really looking at how to allow our life force to guide us in these new ways of being and creating. So that's going to be really fun. And I invite you to join me there. Okay. This is Dr. Kate Newberg signing off. Such a pleasure to connect with you across time and space. From my heart to yours. Till next time.